Hey everybody, Joe Tolkien Fanatic Card Alley here, joined by Alex Jax Conroy of JaX Money Crew fame for another episode of Through the Years. So first off, how you doing tonight, Alex? Thanks for joining.
Good, man. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
No, thanks for being here. So this is kind of a momentous week in your life for those of you who maybe haven't been following the news or even have been following the news. Complexity Gaming has been a majority stake in Complexity Gaming has been acquired by Jerry Jones and John Goff of the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys, and Alex was up until very recently a co-owner of Complexity Gaming. So congratulations to you.
Thank you, man. Very cool.
So let's go back to 2009, 2010. How did you originally get involved with Complexity?
So it was the end of the CGS, and that ended really abruptly. At the time, we really thought CGS was going to be like the future of esports. As flawed as it was, there was just so much money behind it. We had a managers meeting scheduled for like 2 weeks from the point it was canceled. So like we all had flights to California. There was no indication it was going to end. So everyone was sort of scrambling around. We're like, what do we do? Jason Lake and I had always been friends back, since 2004, I think is when I met Lake. And we were all sort of figuring out what was going on. I immediately relaunched JMC with a Counter-Strike lineup that was at the time, really impressive. And he's like, look, I'm going to bring back complexity. Let's do this right. Instead of picking up fragmented pieces of like what's left of esports and fighting over scraps, let's get like the strongest group of people we can together, which at the time was Jason Bass, Jason Lake, and myself. And he's like, you guys are two equal partners in this team, and let's kind of rise from the ashes together and make, for lack of a better term, make complexity great again.
So I remember that there was this whole thing where the Complexity brand was actually sold to the CGS, right? So when the CGS ended, Jason Lake had to buy that brand back from the CGS. Is that correct?
We were able to kind of talk to them, and I can't go into like crazy details about what happened, but at the end of the day, we're like, look, we really got screwed, and I think I can openly say that because I think I'm the only gym that didn't sign an NDA when we left, and so it just was such an abrupt ending. And they were like, "What are you going to do with this brand?" I mean, it's such a storied part of esports, and it essentially scarred the community on a pretty major level right here. It would be in the best faith of you guys going forward to just kind of give the brand back and give it back to the community and let us keep going with it because complexity is and is going to continue to be such a huge brand in American esports.
Mm-hmm. How'd you get away without signing an NDA like everyone else did?
I think there was a thing where they would give you like $2,500 if you signed the NDA, and I mean, you got to realize I was like 21 years old, and I was like, I'm going national with this. I'm writing a book. There's no way. I mean, looking back, I don't think this is the first time I've ever publicly talked about it, and $2,500 would be really good right now. But at the time, I was like really righteous about this. I was like, I'm not signing anything. So it's like,
I'm not taking your blood money Concast. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not taking your blood money. Oh god, the blood money would be great.
Okay, so you had what I assume was a minority stake in the Complexity Gaming organization up until recently, as we discussed. Talk about kind of the various hats and roles that you had over your time in Complexity. I know you were involved with the CS team at the early time, anyway.
Yeah, so when Complexity first came back, we were actually all 1/3 partners, Jason, and I. I had a very active role with the team. We needed funding. We had a brand. We knew we had a strong brand. We needed funding. I flew out to CES at the time and basically walked the floor and were able to pick up Creative as our title sponsor because we needed to pay these players. We had travel to pay for. We were all kind of burned from CGS, so there wasn't a ton of like personal income to finance the teams with. So we got Creative to come on board and be like, look, we'll pay for a CS team and we'll pay for like a web. Look, we'll help you guys get back on your feet. And then they ended up being an incredible partner to Complexity going forward through the years. But that was my initial first step, was getting us our partner. And then my responsibility at the time was Chief Development Officer. So I would bring in new sponsorships and I would travel with the team. Bass has 2 kids, Lake has 2 kids. And at one point I was traveling 90 days a year. with complexity with our WoW team, which was at the time the best in the world. We had two WoW teams actually, our CS team. So we were traveling quite a bit, and I just think with kids and stuff, they couldn't do that travel. But I was 22, so I could. It was my first job out of college technically, because I graduated that year. So yeah, that was basically my job, was to bring in sponsors, go to these events, go to these meetings, and travel with the team.
So, I mean, you must have some good stories from traveling around the world with these players. I know that I know that you at least were doing it up to the point when the Brazilian lineup was then when Cole had the Brazilian lineup, right? With Fallen and FNX and some of these guys. So are there any stories that you're able to share from your time traveling around the world with complexity?
I will say that traveling around with the Brazilian guys, I just was hanging out with Fallen when they were in New York, and obviously now he's like the biggest name in CS. But when he was on our team, he was kind of a new guy, and he's like the man. And I grew so close to those guys because we traveled there was a long period because we had ESWC and WCG in LA, so and then another tournament that I can't even remember at this point. But we were on the road together for 6 weeks, and at the time, only Knack really spoke like full-on English, and so we'd be hanging out for like days at a time, just be kind of chilling. But we bonded because like we laughed and we all hung out, and obviously every single girl in one of these shopping malls FNX would hit on, and like it just was a good time, and I really did bond with those guys, and we had a great team, and we knew that the talent was there, and they just needed a little bit of support, and now SK is obviously such an amazing powerhouse team, but they were just genuinely good guys. It's a recent story. When I saw Fallen, I saw him in a hotel lobby, and he's like, "Come out to dinner with my mom and my brother," and so I got to hang out with them a little bit, and they just are just really, really good dudes.
Yeah. So, I mean, at least in regards to FNX, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
He's a really good guy, though. I mean, he's a funny dude, and he'd always make me laugh, like whatever Lincoln was doing. And Knack was the serious one, right? So Knack, I don't know what they'd be doing. They'd be in another room, and you just hear Knack yell, "Lincoln!" I was like, oh, God. What? But it was never anything like that bad. He's a really solid dude, and I think he's one of the best players in the world still.
Have you kept in touch with Knack at all? Because obviously he's kind of doing his thing over in Europe still. He's almost 30-something, if not 30-something already. He's still pursuing the dream.
Yeah, Knack was in New York a few years ago, and I caught up with him a little bit on Facebook. I don't think we were able to link up, but him and I were very close just because when we were traveling, I could communicate with him the most. But really, that whole team, like I said, I don't have enough good things to say about them because they're just great guys.
Mm-hmm. So to wrap up the contemporary history section of the show. So obviously we talked about the acquisition. How can you talk about kind of how that whole thing came to be, what that process was like, and I mean what that means for you going forward and complexity as well?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I can definitely touch on some of it. I wasn't directly involved on the day-to-day basis like Lake was. I mean, there was like larger decisions as one of the equity partners of the team, because obviously I stepped away from my active role in complexity a few years ago to focus on real estate and some things here in New York, and so I wasn't involved in any of the day-to-day, but I still had sort of like a yearly catch-up with those guys, and I got a call about 4 months ago, and it was from Jason Bass, and he said, "Look, now is the time when we need to start bringing you in on these conversations. We're going to get acquired by Dallas Cowboys." And I lived in Dallas for 5 years. I went to SMU, Cowboys fan, and it's sort of like the dream to get acquired by a team of that caliber because of the support that they can give you. And so I didn't really know what it meant at the time. They didn't really know what it meant at the time. As things evolved, things became clear. There were major decisions that I'd get calls from Lake and Bass about that I'd, put my 2 cents in on. But at the end of the day, what it means for complexity, and I think Jason said he had a quote that was like, "We're like a fighter jet that never had enough fuel." And I think that's such a solid and correct quote. Because what it means for complexity is they'll have what they need going forward from a professional organization to once again rise to be one of the best teams in the world. What it means for me and Bass, we both stepped away and sort of cashed out all our shares. And what it means for me personally is because of some financial freedoms I now have, I can re-enter esports and really put more of a full-time focus on it. and I'm going to be doing that by trying to consult other athletes and sports teams on how to navigate the space, and also on some hopefully doing some hosting things that I'm talking to some people about.
Okay, cool. So now that we've talked about like the headline news from earlier in the week, let's go way back to the beginning of everything. So how did your Counter-Strike journey like really begin in earnest all those years ago?
I started playing Counter-Strike in Beta 4, so I want to say that was 2000. It might be 1999. I don't want people on like the forums like flaming me, being like, "Oh my God, you're so wrong." But yeah, it was Beta 4. It was just a game I played with my friends. Really, nothing more than that. And then the idea of like clans at the time came up, and then our team became like pretty good. And then obviously Team 3D was doing their thing, and I was like, this Craig Levine guy's really got something here. And I was New York local, so I had ability to meet Craig and to meet the 3D guys. And I was like, I think there's something here. And I went out, and at the time, the team was called JaX Money Crew, and I was like, we'll change the name one day because that's a ridiculous name. We're obviously not going to go pro with this name. No one will take us seriously. And we got some product sponsorships from Red Bull and SteelSeries, and SteelSeries would let us like sell the gear to pay for like trips and stuff, and they were local. And then things evolved. We won Cal IM the season after Complexity did, and I got a loan from some family members at the time, and they were like, "Here's $5,000 if you really think you can make a business out of it." And I spent it all on a house in Westchester, Pennsylvania, for my team. And I realized I wasn't good enough to play on the team anymore. And I got one of the first team houses in the country, and they got evicted within 2.5 months. So that was all my money. I didn't have any other money, and they'd set the fire alarm off, and like the super came to see what was going on, and like the place was just in bad shape. And
right.
Looking back on it, I was a 17-year-old kid that like had an idea of what he needed to do, but I didn't do it as well as I could have. But I was always good at scouting talent, and that the year after that, I was able to get a little more money from SteelSeries, actually, who really believed in me, and Kim Rom over there really believed in me. And I sent a team to CPL that wasn't getting paid salaries, and I knew these guys were good, and they came in third at Winter CPL, and they took out NIP, and they took out compLexity, and they beat all these teams. And that's when I think JaX Money Crew really came on the map. And after that, we had 2 or 3 CPLs. We were the #1 North American team. I don't think 3D ever placed better than us at a CPL that we attended, other than our first one. Mm-hmm. We were getting the ESWC invites. I was able to get like server sponsors to cash in money. Like JaX Money Crew was never a team that had money, ironically. I literally was like, I at that point I was 18. I took my first credit card out in college. I did exactly what they tell you not to do, and I maxed it out for these tickets, and I'd wait for like our small sponsors to give us money.
Right.
But I made it work, and we went from tournament to tournament, and the brand grew and the team grew, and somehow we were always like the scrappy little underdogs that were able to beat the big boys and stay relevant and stay on top of the North American scene.
Right. So that CPL you're referring to, where you kind of surprised everyone, that would have been Winter 2005, correct? I think. Correct.
That's when Zid had his first performance, and Zid and I always had a really like strong bond because that was his breakout year. Like he had never been to a CPL before. He was like the #2 player at that CPL, and he ended up playing for me for 6 or 7 years until he retired.
Right. And I mean, you talk about how ridiculous the name JaX Money Crew is, but you actually like spawned like a trend. Like we have all these so and so's something crew or so and so's something gang teams these days, and I'm actually trying to get people to stop doing it because it's too obnoxious.
It's pretty obnoxious. I mean, I had a vision of what I wanted this thing to be, and the name just was sort of a caricature of who I was when I was standing behind the team and screaming, which was all genuine. Like I actually cared because I literally was putting my heart and soul and every bit of cash I had into this team at the time. So when they scored rounds and I was like jumping up and freaking out, totally all real. But the name just kind of went along with all that. And looking back on it, we probably would have had more sponsors had we had like a more legitimate name. But it became a name after 2005, and then we couldn't really change it.
Right. You should have had like Simplicity Gaming. Complexity, simplicity, then the whole thing would have really worked out.
Like the one-word teams are just they're like very easy to get behind. One of them.
Very easy to brand. Okay, so I mean, so
now I know.
Now you know. So through the course of 1.6, you had like all these amazing players playing under the JMC brand, and then this whole CGS thing comes rolling around. And then talk about like how that worked with the Combine and how you got brought on as the GM and how that whole thing worked.
Yeah, totally. So CGS, and a lot of people hate on it, was one of the most, to this day, one of the most amazing experiences I ever had in my life. I remember when I got the call from Craig Levine, basically they were going to pick 6 GMs. And at first I was pretty cocky about it. I was like, look, I'm one of the only like managers that people know. Like obviously people know who JaX was because I named the team after myself. But at the same time, I was 19 years old, right? And the next youngest GM that they hired was 28. And so I kept hearing about people getting hired, and my name wasn't mentioned, and I started to get really worried. And it was obvious they were going for diversity in who they hired. Like they hired DKT, who is one of my great friends, or is just a great guy to hire, obviously. But I was like, oh man, he's a player. And then they hired Moto to run 3D, which kind of made sense to me. But I was like, I'm not going to get hired. And it's ironic because I was in a movie theater at a CGS qualifier event that my team was playing in to qualify for the Combine, and I get a call from Jason Lake, and he's like, dude, congrats, I heard you got the last spot. And I was like, what? And then when I'm on the phone with him, I get a call from Craig Levine incoming, and I go, Jason, I gotta go. And I pick it up, and Craig's like, hey man, how you doing? And I was like, I got it, didn't I got it. And he's like, yeah, you got it. And they gave me the Dallas team because I lived in Dallas at the time. I went, as I said, I was going to SMU, so I was really connected to that community, which meant a lot to me. And then the Combine came around, and at the time, JMC, I think we came second in that Combine, and we really had, once again, one of the best teams in the world. And I was really worried about losing my CS team because the deal was 3D got to keep theirs, and compLexity got to keep theirs. And we were going into the draft, which was, to this day, probably the most ridiculous experience of my life. I mean, you're 19 years old and you're driving into the Playboy Mansion, and you're looking around and you're like, this isn't real. This isn't happening, right? This isn't happening because of Counter-Strike. And it was happening because of Counter-Strike. And we're all sort of giddy. And being the guy that I was, I really was like trying to talk to all the bunnies and be like, so what's up with you? Like, how are you? And they were like, you can just focus. Hard place to focus when
shut up,
nerd. Yeah, they're like, you do what? You're on a computer gaming? They're like, oh, can you just? I'm paid to be here. Thank you. And so the first round of the draft came around, and I knew Master was going to be the biggest star in the league. He's a DOA player. There were 2 events that were one-off events that they'd already done before committing to an entire TV show. And they were all about this kid, and he was amazing. He was the best DOA player in the world, and he's from Dallas. And I had to talk with him, and he's like, dude, I want to play for your team. If you don't draft me, another team will in the first round. I want to play for Dallas. I'm the personality you want. And I talked to my CS team, and I'm like, what do I do? And they were like, draft him, and then get us second round. And I was like, I'm going to lose you guys if I wait second round. And I remember it was between the only person that I thought was going to take him was Mark Dolvin. And Mark Dolvin came up to me, and there were no love lost between Mark and I. Like off camera, it's very well known. Pandemic always was like number 4, and JMC was always like number 2 or 3, and they're like, but it was not. I don't have anything bad to say about him now, but at the time, there was no love lost. So he came up to me and he goes, I'm gonna draft your team if you don't draft him. And I remember being so nervous. And first pick came around, I looked over at him and I go, I think you're full of shit. And can I say that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, you're good. Not a family show.
And I was like, I don't think you are. And he didn't draft him because I guess Dominator was one of the most intimidating guys I've ever met. I mean, he's built like an NFL player. And he went up to him and he goes, hey, Dolvin, we're not playing for you. And then he walked away. That's all he said. It's a very scary guy. And and then the rest of the draft went well. At the time, we had a very promising team. I remember the first thing I did after the draft was I jumped into the grotto with a 3-piece suit on and swam around for a little bit. Everyone looked at me like, you really shouldn't be on this show. But Dallas had a rough first year. We came back second year and we're, I think without argument, the best team in the world, just record-wise and the way we were performing. But we learned a lot the first year. We were definitely humbled. And I mean, CGS was really looking back on it a great experience. Just the way it ended, really put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth because we woke up one day and went to the website. I remember my girlfriend at the time was like, "Huh, the CGS shut down?" I was like,
What?
"What?" Like, you're waking up and your girlfriend's like, "Oh, you don't have a job anymore?" And I was like, "What?" And I have like missed calls from my players, and I'm calling people. I don't have answers.
Right.
Like I said, we were supposed to fly to LA 2 weeks from then for manager meetings for season 3. We were guaranteed 3 seasons, like via these contracts that ended up not being enforceable. And the entire experience was great. Living in the apartments in LA was great. We all got along super well. We had a blast. We sort of became a family, which is weird because you have to compete with these people every week. But you're living with them and you're barbecuing with them and you're hanging out with them. They're like the only people you know in LA, so they become your friends.
Right.
But we also have these rivalries. So it was really a sad experience when it shut down because we really thought it had its flaws. Totally had its flaws. Totally admit that. But we felt internally we could fix them and really grow something big. And when it was cut so short, it was just a shock to literally everyone involved.
Mm-hmm. And talking about one of those flaws of the CGS that most people will refer to now is kind of like the post-apocalyptic hellscape that it left, especially for CS, in its wake, right? Because I believe there was a situation where some of the players were still getting paid by the CGS, so they didn't see any need to come back to active playing. Can you kind of elaborate on how that whole thing worked?
I definitely haven't heard that. I don't think the CGS. I mean, they stopped paying all of us at the same time. Like,
okay.
Our paychecks were done.
Okay.
But what happened was all of the teams that went into the CGS were legit teams, and we were all fully sponsored by Intel and AMD and SteelSeries, and I think Tylenol at that time was sponsoring Rival, but maybe that was beforehand. But the point is, we all dropped these sponsors for the promise of a greener pasture, and the deal was, look, you're never going to have to worry about player salaries again. To me, it was exciting because JaX Money Crew could finally afford the same players that a 3D could.
Right.
And it was just this even playing ground, and we're like, this is awesome. This is really what esports should be. The best players are going to succeed. And so when we left, like, third and fourth tier teams got all those sponsors. And when we came back, it wasn't like we were welcomed back with open arms, and they were like, hey, thanks for ditching us 2 years ago. We can't wait to sponsor your team again. It was scary. And we're like, we screwed up. We made a mistake. We bet on the wrong horse. And so that's why at the beginning of compLexity, when I joined up with Jason and Jason, it was, I mean, we scraped by for a little bit getting our first few partners, but once again, Creative was just an amazing partner that really allowed compLexity to rise like a phoenix.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about concepts that we've seen in recent years? Like, you have Riot with the LCS, you have ELEAGUE, you have the Overwatch League, which is coming down the pipe. I mean, do you think that these are kind of what the CGS could have been if it was done properly, or do you think that we're?
Well, I think there's
Go on.
There's some questions, and some of these newer leagues, there's obviously some questions. I know when the Cowboys asked about the Overwatch League, I believe they were advised against joining it, but I don't know. I think the Overwatch League could really succeed. I think they got some real branding behind it. CGS had some branding behind it, but CGS had no competition, really.
Right.
So CGS was competing against hotel basements, and so it was this behemoth. And now, if you're a pro player, you can make money in LCS. You can make money in the Overwatch League. I think this competition is healthy because there's not one overarching league for sports. Like baseball, basketball, football, they don't all compete under the same banner. And that's what the CGS tried to do. And now that you're seeing games running their own leagues, especially by the developers who should be running the leagues, in large part, I mean, there's obviously private companies that do a great job as well, but having these specialized categories, I think, is a much smarter way to do it. So I'm really excited for the future of esports. I'm excited to see what the LCS guys do. I'm really pumped for Overwatch League to see what they can do. I know they have some great people involved there, so I'm definitely excited for where esports is going. I don't know if every league is going to succeed, but the fact that they're more specialized is definitely the way to go about it.
Talk about kind of what it's like for you, as you mentioned, hotel basements, right? CPLs were always in hotel basements or convention centers or what have you. And then, I saw you at ESL New York, and like just the spectacle of that caliber of an event. I mean, is it even fathomable to you, like where things were when you began and where we are now and where we could be going?
Yeah, I mean, I will say it is fathomable because there were a few events that are that level. You know, when I was when I was traveling around with the team, like ESWC every year was amazing.
Right.
And that was the first event we ever played in a true stadium, like on jumbotrons, and um, it was, I mean, it was nuts. Like I had never been to an event like that, and the CGS events, you know, were well done. They had live audiences. Those were like kind of grander, especially their test events, the CGI events.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd seen events like that. It's just cool now that it's the norm. Like when there's an event in a stadium, it's no longer like, oh my God, there's an event in a sports stadium. It's like, of course it's in a sports stadium. Where else would it be?
Right.
So I saw it evolve a bit, and I was part of sort of that hybrid time when they're. Sorry, I live in New York City. It's going to be a little loud sometimes.
Yeah, we're both in New York City, so.
But yeah, it's great to see where it is now. It's great to see dedicated stadiums coming up. That I think is the next natural evolution, is stadiums dedicated to games or teams or developers.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we'll continue to see that.
Mm-hmm. So just to kind of put a whole bow on it right now. So you're no longer with Complexity after the acquisition, but you are, as you mentioned, kind of looking to get back involved in esports, and this acquisition kind of will be allowing you to help facilitate that a little bit. So talk about kind of what you've kind of done in the past in your kind of mini return to esports, and kind of what you're looking to do in the future in more depth.
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity in esports right now, and I think you see a lot of people coming in that have been in esports a year or two and are like slapping the label esports expert on there. Obviously, I departed the scene a few years ago, but I didn't like leave it completely. I followed it. I did consulting. I'm obviously looking to continue doing that, but you know, more so getting back involved in Counter-Strike especially, and the FPS scene. You know, as a host, as a personality, and I have connections with a lot of these guys, even the Overwatch guys that were former Quake players. So it'd be nice to get back into the role, get back into the scene, and hang out with these guys that I've known for 10 or so years. And I think now more than ever I have the ability to do that, because you know, just New York, as I said, is an expensive place to live, and I had to concentrate on sort of my day job for a while. Not that I don't anymore, but I now have more flexibility to pursue something that I've cared about since I was 13 and spent years and years of my life devoting myself to, which is esports and seeing it grow properly in North America.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty much all that I have for you right now. So now I will just yield the floor to you for any shout outs or any soapboxing / ranting you would like to do, and then I'll let you get out of here.
Well, I definitely don't have any soapboxing, but I do, you know, appreciate everyone watching and getting sort of a brief history of an old man. You know what's funny is this is kind of a soapbox. I call myself an old man because I've been around esports for 16 years, 15 years. But I started when I was 15, so you know, I'm 30 now. I guess I'm not like that old. I'm certainly not as old as Jason Bass, if you're watching. I'm just kidding. He's a good guy. Those guys are honestly great guys. I am so happy for them. I think Bass and Lake. I mean, Lake is truly living his dream, and there's not someone I know that deserves it more. And I think he's going to do a fantastic job for the Dallas Cowboys. I don't think they could have picked a better man for the job. I'm happy that Bass is doing well, and you know, the sky's the limit for him. He was such a great guy and a great partner. And I'm excited for where the scene's going. And I think as long as we don't get too excited too quickly and just jump into ideas and really like think about them and listen to the communities and listen to the players. I think player feedback is huge, and we didn't have a ton of that at CGS. So player feedback, incredibly important. The fact that the developers are now leading these leagues and leading these league efforts, totally the way it should be. And then you have events like ESL being run by, like, you know, Craig, who's the OG and is literally the reason I got into professional esports. Seeing guys like that doing well and just doing such a fantastic job. The ESL event that I met you at was incredibly well executed. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for where things are going, and I just hope that we can kind of learn from the past, and the sky's the limit, as I said.
Yeah, I mean, so I know I said I will let you go, but you actually brought up a good point. So CS is actually not one. CS is actually not one of those games where we have a lot of developer involvement. At least not from running a big overarching league, or certainly seems not listening to player feedback very often. Do you think that in the long run that could be extremely harmful and detrimental to the game, or will it be able to be sidestepped?
I think CS is an interesting animal because it I mean, StarCraft is obviously the original esport, but CS has been around for a long time, and there's sort of a tried and true method of how CS works, and there's ground rules that have been created over the course of 12 years. And while they don't have like a Valve league, Valve is supporting these majors and they're supporting these minors, and they have amazing partners like ESL that execute to a level that I don't know if Valve necessarily needs to dedicate a ton of like internal resources to creating a league when they already have a partner there that does it well. I mean, if ESL did a bad job, I'd say absolutely get rid of them, but they don't. They do a fantastic job. They hired BSL, who is a really good friend of mine, to be their tournament director. If you guys don't know him, like super old school CS. He was on NOA.
Norway.
Awesome dude. Yeah, from Norway. And he's killing it. So like ESL's hiring the right people. And they have obviously Craig behind them and a ton of other really talented people. So I think Valve's in good shape with what they're doing. Player feedback's always going to be contended because players are always going to want something different, and it might always change. And at the end of the day, the leagues are going to have to make the decisions the leagues are going to have to make. And I think that they're on the right path, especially based off the event that we went to at Barclays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, that's pretty much all I have for you for JaX. So everyone, thank you for watching. JaX, thank you for joining, and good luck in your ventures.
See you later. Thank you for having me.